I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium, and here we explore life, death, consciousness, and what it all means. Today, I have Lynn K. Russell on the show. Lynn is a world expert on near-death experiences. She has researched 2,500 cases for Dr. Jeffery Long at Near-Death Experience Research Foundation. She has spent many years as a counselor. Lynn has a new book out called The Wonder of You: What the Near-Death Experience Tells Us About Yourself. Aside from spirituality, she has a keen interest in quantum theory, cosmology, the brain, and consciousness. Welcome, Lynn.
Thank you for having me.
So we have a few guests in a row here. My guest last week, we also sort of talked about this notion of, okay, so we know a lot about near-death experiences, but how can that help us in our own lives? I mean, it seems clear that there's a lot of people out there who have had these experiences. So Can you start out by telling us what makes your book a little bit different than the other near-death experience books out there?
Sure. Well, when I first started doing the research, I was interested in what happened after death. But after a while, that got a little repetitious, but I was really more fascinated with the deeper messages that were coming back from the beyond. And so that's what my book is primarily about, is what happens after the near-death experience and what are the deep, deep messages, spiritual messages that people are bringing back.
Oh, okay, so let's talk about some of the tenets in the book, because I went through the book and I kind of picked out the ones that I felt were the most helpful, but if you think there's other ones, we could talk about that too. But I thought these were important in terms of encouraging people's growth. So the first thing that I kind of pulled out was this notion of purpose. But I think that this can be a real catch-22 for people, because it can leave people feeling frustrated if they feel like they don't have purpose or they're not on their purpose. And they don't know where to start. So how do you see purpose, and how did this message kind of come through in all your research?
Well, the purpose, we sometimes get purpose mixed up with goal, and I'm talking spiritually and not just every day. So we all have a purpose. Our purpose is to simply be, to experience life and to just get in there and do all we can. That's our purpose, because through our existence here, we are perpetually giving back to the source. And so source is experiencing as we experience, because we are one with the source. And so there is no separation whatsoever. And so anything we do goes back to the source. So that everybody has a purpose. Now, different people have different goals, and that's quite a different thing. But usually what happens is that we will find ourselves being interested in a particular goal or a particular subject or area of interest that we just are guided towards. For example, some people are more interested in music and they become musicians, or other people become scientists, and etc. And so those are our goals that we have set up before we come into this life, and that is set up before through our guides, with our guides through our souls. And so we will be guided towards that. What I find is that most people are working so hard to find out what their goal is, and they're probably already living it and being it. So we need to, not work quite so hard.
So you're really differentiating the two, and goals feels sort of like the everyday job, whatever it is, but purpose is the larger picture of sort of like mindfulness, I would say.
Yes. And goal doesn't necessarily mean, yes, mindfulness is a good example of purpose. Yes, purpose is an automatic thing that comes with simply being alive. And the goal, not everybody is working on their goal. It isn't necessarily related to their career. It's related to the things that are of most interest to them and the things that they find themselves doing over and over and over again.
So if you're drawn to something and you're doing it over and over and over again, but it doesn't fulfill you, does that mean it's not your goal? Does it mean?
Usually if you're drawn to it and you're doing it repeatedly, then it is, you will find that you're being fulfilled while you're doing it. I don't think that I've heard of anybody who is really doing their goal that doesn't enjoy it. And it might be something as simple as being a mother or a father. And that's it. That's their goal, to raise a good family. Mm-hmm. Or it may be something major, like being a prince or a queen or something, or a movie star. It can be anything from the smallest thing that we ignore. It may even be that it's something you say to somebody who helps them through their life or gives them a completely different direction to go in their life. So it's not necessary, but it's usually we're guided in the goal that we are going to be, that we should do.
And so in the book, you also talk about responsibility and freedom. And you say, we look at lives and ask, is this it? Is there nothing more to life? We are born, grow up, make a living, and die. In between, we're saddled with debt and problems. And I think a lot of people, frankly, feel this way, and it's kind of grim and depressing. But what do NDEs teach us about responsibility and freedom?
What I have learned from that is that it doesn't need to be that way, that we have far, far more choice in our existence and in our life than we recognize. We think that life happens to us, that it's something that we just have to put up with it and deal with it. And we don't recognize the role that we take into responsibility and freedom in our lives and making it different than what we are presently experiencing. We think that things are just the way it's supposed to be, but there isn't a supposed to be. What we choose is what is supposed to be.
So it's this notion of sort of co-creating your life.
Yes, exactly. And that makes sense just at this physical level. If you think about it, the choices that we make just determine the direction of our lives. And so if we make better choices and do, and think things through a little better than just reacting emotionally, then we're going to have a better outcome. But gotcha. The other thing is that I think that people don't recognize that responsibility and freedom are the exact same thing. They're not two different things. And I used to think that they were. I thought responsibility was this big, heavy thing that was on my shoulders and I had to be responsible. But that's not true. That's a myth, because responsibility is your freedom. And you can't have responsibility without freedom, and you can't have freedom without responsibility.
Can't have responsibility without freedom. I need to think about this for a minute. And you can't have freedom without responsibility.
Yeah.
I'm going to need to chew on that a little bit more.
Yeah, they're linked together. When I was a child, I was assessed as retarded. Oh, sorry, they don't use that word anymore. Sorry. So mentally slow. And it wasn't until years later that I was taking courses on psychology and was reading a psychology book. And all of a sudden this came to me, and I realized that responsibility and freedom, that when my family was making decisions for me because they didn't think I had the mental capacity to do so, that that they were taking away my freedom. They didn't do it on purpose. They thought that that's what they needed to do. So I can understand that. But they did take away my freedom in that process.
Gotcha. So it's really sort of about us taking back that freedom. Like everybody in the course of their life has probably felt like at some point they had something taken from them.
Yes, and we really do have a role. The only thing that we don't have any control over is other people's actions. But we do have a control over how we perceive that and how we deal with it.
And so when you talk about knowledge in your book, one of the things I think that is always a question for me is that when people come to this world, this current material world that we're living in, that they lose knowledge of other realms, right? Like the unique part about a near-death experience is that people remember, at least what I talked about last week, was they remember sort of the lobby of this other realm. They might not know all the rooms, but they remember kind of stepping in and stepping out. Why do you think we aren't supposed to remember this? Like, what do you attribute it to? Why, when we come here, we lose this knowledge?
Yeah, and that is frustrating for a lot of people, and I can understand that. But in actuality, if we were able to remember, life here would be very, very difficult. It would be more difficult than it already is. I think that we deliberately lose that so that, A, we can grow back to the source, because if we knew we were source already, then it would make it more difficult. But the other thing, we would want to be home. We would want to get back there. That's what and that happens with many, many people who have had death experiences will say, well, what am I supposed to do so I can get back here? And so the light or where their guides or whatever they're told, no, that's not the way it works. So they have to go back with amnesia, and many times they don't remember big sections of their death experience. They'll remember the main points, but there's things that they won't remember at all because they just shouldn't.
But then we also don't remember or have the experience of death being okay, which I think is unfortunate. Like, I think we spend a lot of time in our life fearing and trying to do everything in our power to avoid death.
Yeah.
But if we knew that death was okay, wouldn't that be able, like, if even we just knew that, like and I know that some people do, and they really believe wholeheartedly that when you die, your body dies, but your soul doesn't. But if everybody really believed that, it would monumentally probably shift the way that we are living in the material world. So why can't we have that?
Yeah, I wonder if we're not going through what do I call it? That this isn't pre-planned somehow. That we are remembering through, at the soul level, that this isn't pre-planned, because all of a sudden we're having, all of these people having death experiences and coming back and being able to share their experience with us and tell us that death is okay. So those people do remember their a lot of what's happened, but a lot of the people who have had death experiences, a lot of them come back here with pieces missing. That's what I was meaning. So but they still know that, death is a good thing. And so, but the other thing is, I think that maybe how many people would commit suicide if they knew that it was okay. I think that there would be a concern about that. Because we wouldn't want to stay here. If we knew that everything was okay, well, we can just get rid of this life, then I think we wouldn't stay here.
Except that your soul has to, but even in knowing that, What we also, I feel like, know is that our soul needs to continue to grow and evolve. And
that's right.
Suicide is a way. I have someone coming on in a couple weeks to talk about suicide, but that suicide is not necessarily, it might be a way out from this current life, but not a way out from the overall existence of your soul.
That's right. Yes, that's right. But the point really is that, as you've said, we need to learn and grow and experience and be. And we wouldn't if we remembered. And that's the main point, is that we would not be able to function and to learn and grow if we knew everything.
So can you talk a little bit to us today about fear-death experience? Because this was a totally new term for me.
Yeah, it's a fun thing. I think it's sort of like a miracle, because what happens with fear-death experiences is that people they're in the middle of an accident and all of a sudden they're not. It's unexplainable. And I do know one man, and he's in my book, and he was in the middle of an accident, and the whole place, he saw himself heading for this tree, and he knew this was it. And there was this white light that suddenly came into the room or into the car, and he felt arms wrapped around him. And the accident happened, and he walked away with not a scratch, nothing. Another one was a man who was heading for, I think it was a truck, and he knew that he was going to be hitting this accident was happening, and there was no out of it. And all of a sudden, he's not there anymore. He's at a stoplight down the road. Things like that. That's the fear-death experience, what we're calling fear-death experience, because sometimes it's automatic, like this one fellow with the light. He didn't have any death experience in between that, but some of them will have a full death experience and then still find themselves at a light in the same car, and there's no accident didn't happen. So it's a big question that nobody knows, but I put it in there because it's fascinating.
Is it sort of like divine intervention in that way, or like how? Because
I wonder. Yeah, I think so. I think there is. I think that we have a goal, and we're supposed to accomplish that goal, and we haven't done it, and we can't. It needs to be done within this lifetime, not another lifetime. And so I think that there is an intervention that happens there.
And when you say, so the fear-death experience is different because, I guess I'm confused, the person doesn't have that physical death, right? They're just like, it's like they're catapulted like across the time where they would have, like the person is about to hit the tree, they don't hit the tree, or they hit the tree, but they're alive, like totally walk out of that unscathed. Versus they actually do hit the tree, they have all these internal injuries, they die, they go up, they, see their loved ones, they experience the love, all of that. Then they come back into a physical body, and that physical body is then kind of wounded. That's sort of the difference?
Well, no, they wouldn't have the injuries and die.
Right. For the fear death, they wouldn't, right?
Yeah, they would have a death. They might go to the other side, but their bodies are still fine. They never do have the accident. So that's why the fear, because we're so frightened that we die, and then we come back. The person doesn't die, doesn't have a death experience. They may find themselves on the other side, but then they're right back in their body again.
But they don't have the difference, I guess, what I'm trying to differentiate is that there's no physicality to it. Like they might kind of spiritually cross over and come back, I guess, but that they don't have that experience of being physically wounded or...
That's right. Yes. And It's strange. I mean, Yeah, and they should have. They should have. The car should have been damaged. Well, with the fellow that had the light in his car, the car was totaled. But most of the time, these things happen. There was one fellow with a motorcycle. He was in the country lane, and there was a series of post boxes and on poles at the side of the road, and he was heading for those poles, and he knew this was it. And the next thing you know, he's on the other side, and there's the car. His motorcycle was fine, and he was fine, and that shouldn't have happened. There should have been some accident happen, and it didn't.
Wow. And is this common? Did you find a lot of people who reported
No,
this?
there's not a lot of fear-death experiences, but you can find them if you go to NDERF, and then just in the search engine, go to fear-death experiences, and they'll come up for you, and you can read a number of them.
Interesting. Okay, so let's shift a little again and talk about consciousness manifestations. So what is that exactly? I know there's a few we can kind of talk about because you kind of go through some of them.
What was exciting for me about that was we have learned more and more through science and other ways, and it's been talked about for centuries through the Eastern philosophies, that consciousness is the base of our connection to source and connection to the being, that the soul, the universe is conscious, that there's a consciousness within the universe that we are connected to. Mm-hmm. So my point with the conscious manifestations, and back to what I'm talking about with purpose and responsibility and freedom, that we can choose. And so consciousness was just an illustration of how the conscious manifestations was an illustration of how we're using our consciousness right here in this world existence in ways that we don't recognize, and that we haven't stopped to think about it in that way. For example, people who have multiple personalities, or stigmata I love stigmata because that's so obvious, and prayer and positive thought and how it affects others, and placebos. Those are things that happen, and yet there they are, and we know that they're coming from consciousness. And so it's a good illustration of how consciousness can manifest in our everyday life if we allow it to be.
And you talk about plant and animal consciousness. Can you expand on that? I actually have my next week's show after you is going to be an animal communicator. So I feel like it might dovetail nicely with that.
Yes, it was amazing that plants have got way more consciousness than we ever imagined. We didn't realize that they could even communicate, but they care about us. They can protect each other. They can work out problems. I'm talking plants, and they have memories, and they can remember a person who did wrong to them. So that's amazing for a plant.
How did you discover that? How do you prove that?
There's a lot of research on plants now. In the beginning, excuse me, it was started with a fellow in I can't remember his name right now, but I have it in my book. Sorry, I can't remember his name. But anyway, he was with the FBI, and he was the polygraph guy. He was the person who put the electrodes on the individuals and would ask the questions. Well, I guess he must have been having a slow time, and so he put a polygraph on a leaf of a plant, and then he thought about burning the plant, starting the plant on fire. Mm-hmm. And the polygraph just went nuts. Well, he didn't expect that. He didn't know that there would be a reaction. And so that's when he realized that, wait a minute, there's something more going on here. And so that's why and then since then, that was back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, around there. And since then, there's been tons of experiences and research and things going with plants and their abilities. And Findhorn, which is Find Horn, Horn, is a place in Scotland, northern Scotland, that sends these love messages to their plants. And they have oranges, tomatoes, they're as large as their heads, maybe more. They have cabbages that are as big as a man. You could hide behind them. They're so big, they're just enormous. And it's because they're sending love messages to these giant vegetables.
And that's what's helping them to grow.
Yeah. Wow. And the plants just love it. They just respond. And this is what happens if they get these giant vegetables. You can go online and look up Findhorn images, and you'll see the plants and the vegetables that they get from them. That a carrot can be 6 feet tall.
Wow, it makes a lot of sense, right? Like if the main message is always love, 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 love.
Yes.
And we're sending that, then anything that we send it to, in theory, should grow. Right? Like we know humans grow better when they're loved.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting.
It's fascinating. I love it.
So what would you say is the biggest takeaway from your book?
Well, my biggest takeaway is to understand that we are far more amazing than we ever give ourselves credit for being. We are absolutely fantastic, and we can accomplish way more than we give ourselves credit for. Most of us go to school, get our career, and that's pretty well it. But we need to challenge ourselves, and we need to trust ourselves too, that we have got far more within us than we give ourselves credit, and that we can accomplish a great deal.
I love that. Well, Lynn, if people want to find you or learn about your book, where can they do that?
Well, the book is on Amazon, and it's on a number of other different outlets, book outlets in the world. So they can order anywhere that there's Amazon. You can order, but it's Barnes and Noble, and it's a number of other distributors. So it should be in bookstores as well. And
the book is called The Wonder of You: What the Near-Death Experience Tells You About Yourself.
Yes.
And do you have a website or anything, or just?
No, I had a website, but it got corrupted. So I am getting a new one, and I've got somebody else coming over to help me do that. And but if you just Google my name, Lynn K. Russell, you have to say the K because there's a bazillion Lynn Russells. Right. And so just Lynn K. Russell, and you'll find me on the net. I'm on Facebook, and I'm on a bunch of other things, Twitter and so on. So I'm very accessible.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Lynn, for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to chat.
Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Curious about what comes next and what it all means? You can subscribe on iTunes. Just go to podcasts and find Life, Death, and the Space Between and hit subscribe. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Dr. Amy Robbins. Ask me any questions you might have, let me know what else you'd love to hear about, or just share your story. I can't wait to hear from you.